One of the things I talk about all the time on this channel is how MMA YouTube content creators have changed the way MMA fans are consuming content. And with Ariel Helwani's recent career move, I think it's a fair question to ask, what will the future of MMA content and the industry look like in the near future? My name is James Lynch. So if you're not familiar with my work, I work on kind of both sides of the coin. I'm an MMA reporter first and foremost. I do a lot of interviews, but I'm also a part-time YouTube content creator as well. So I kind of pay attention to both things that are going on right now. And if you look at MMA Guru's channel at 219,000 subscribers and some of the views he's getting on regular videos, it's pretty interesting to see that this is where fans are primarily going to consume content. Now, Ariel Helwani has been a staple in the MMA game for a long time. And as we know, he's made a big move going on his own and partnering with Yahoo Sports. He's created this new outlet called Uncrowned. And a lot of people have sort of chimed in on this. I've done a few videos on this topic. Today's video, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth, but there's a really good Substack article from Nate Wilcox. So if you don't know Nate Wilcox, he used to run Bloody Elbow. He's the former owner. And he had a really good article titled Ariel Helwani Leaves Vox Media and Where Does That Leave the Fans? Really interesting read, but there's a point in this article, if you're a member of the Substack, that I think is really interesting here. And I'm going to read that. This is going to sort of tie into what I'm going to talk about in today's video. So Nate, who's obviously coming from traditional media, so you can expect this type of response. And let me just zoom in a little bit here so we get this a bit better. He says, almost more disheartening is the response of MMA YouTube star Jesse on Fire, whose shrewdness is reflected in his business analysis of Vox Media versus Ariel Helwani dynamic in 2024. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but he says, Jesse claims that the reason why Ariel is leaving Vox Media, I bet you, is the offer was low because businesses are recognizing their business model is finished. Fox competitors like Vice Media were valued at $1 billion are now basically bankrupt because they not only put out garbage content, but that's not the only reason they went bankrupt. Anyways, he sort of goes on to a bunch of other stuff. But here's the key thing in this article from Nate that I think is very true for the industry going forward. And this is very interesting. So Nate says, so yeah, the moral of the story is Vox Media has not only lost Ariel Helwani, but it's lost out to creators like Jesse on Fire and MMA Guru, whose overhead is much lower and have no incentive whatsoever to actually report on the sport in a responsible manner. So sort of that tone at the end. Nate's coming from the traditional media where, hey, you don't bash fighters, you cover the sport like it's a real sport. Obviously, the content creator side of thing is more for entertainment, so they don't need to follow sort of the journalistic rules. But I think the key thing here is whose overhead is much lower, and it brings up a really good point. And one of the things with MMA Guru, his overhead is very low, and you got to give him credit. And I've said this before, to me, what triumphs everything when it comes to people consuming content is not the production quality, it's always the content. And if you look at MMA Guru's stuff here, the thumbnails, they could be better. I know he creates his own thumbnails, but they obviously are eye-catching. That's important. But the actual production itself, this is just one from UFC Vegas 96 that we're going to look at here in a second once this ad runs. But you'll look at it here. Guru doesn't have like a big overhead when it comes to the type of production he's putting out there. And the reason I think this is important, if you look at it here, webcam, he's got a light in the back, but this is, if you look at other shows, you look at like Joe Rogan, you look at other big production shows, they have like multi-camera, they have a director, they have all this stuff. But Guru is sort of proven, and I'm actually giving him a compliment here, is Guru sort of proof that it's all about the content at the end of the day. It's not necessarily about the production. You don't need, same thing with Jesse on Fire, same sort of thing. Jesse, if you look at it here, he's built a bit of a studio. I think it looks really cool, but there are, creators out there that have better production quality. But to me, it's more about the content. And both of these gentlemen have sort of proved that at the end of the day. So that's sort of changing things. Now, if you look at what traditional media has done, you think of MMA fighting. They've spent a lot of money on, having the studio for Ariel Helwani for the MMA Hour. They have a staff, they have a website, they send people to events. That's a lot of money to spend. And they're getting outdrawn by creators like Jesse on Fire and MMA Guru. I mean, UFC Vegas 96 event recap, that was an event that we had last week. 93,000 views. There's no one even close to that in terms of post-fight shows or anything like that on YouTube. Guru really has established himself as the king of MMA content creation in terms of viewership. Look at this, 183,000 views, 93,000 views. His videos at the minimum are, like 77,000, 61,000 is maybe his lowest one that he's had for a fight night card, which was one of the worst cards we've had this year on paper. 61,000 views. So the reason I think this is really interesting is because Ariel Helwani's career move is kind of, it is different. It's more the Pat McAfee model. Pat McAfee, I should say that correctly. But it's also a bit of traditional as well. And I'll kind of explain what I mean in a second here. So again, I'm not going to read this entire post. This is more an update from what Ariel said. It says he's back home from 34 days in France and England. Obviously, he was covering the Olympics. Here's the interesting thing. Launch dates to come, more announcements to come. Thank you for your patience and support. The most important date is September 13th, Venetian in Las Vegas, night before UFC No Chain, UFC Canelo. We'll be doing a live show from the hotel, fans invited. Ceremonial weigh-ins will be streamed on the Ariel Helwani YouTube channel. Boys will be there and guests, special preview, you will. I may pop up with channel impromptu here and there. In the meantime, to talk about stuff, can't wait to be back in your lives. Now, my understanding here is that, and Ariel's mentioned this before, or Yahoo mentioned this, they're going to be building a new studio for Ariel, which I think is kind of interesting because, you know, you obviously want it to look good, but like I just showed you here, you don't need a big, fancy, expensive studio to get the content out there. People are sort of over that. I think people are willing to look past that if the content's really good. They're also flying down to Vegas. You know, they're flying a crew down. They're staying at the Venetian. That's not cheap. This is all cost. Now, obviously, Yahoo's a big company, one of the biggest sports companies in the world, so they can afford it. I just think it's interesting that Ariel's sort of, while he is on his own and he's going to own his own content, I think it's interesting that you've got these companies spending this big money to kick things off when you have sort of proof in the pudding here that you don't need a lot of overhead costs if your content's really good. So that's what I find interesting. Like, are they going to make that money back? I don't know if the fans are going to be charged to go check this, live show out. I'm assuming they aren't. Otherwise, I think there would be detail with that. And this is not just MMA. There'll be boxing. There'll be, pro wrestling, I think, as well, is going to be included in this. So it certainly opens up the doors a little bit for MMA. But I think it's interesting to see that, again, even someone like Nate, who's followed the media industry for a long time, and let me bring up that quote again, there's the overhead is much lower. So that's what I mean. Like, are you getting the cost of what you're putting into this? That's what I think is interesting, because obviously Yahoo's going to pay Ariel a lot. Now, I think, the question is Ariel going to succeed in this new endeavor? I think he will. He's the biggest name in the sport. Everyone knows who he is. They're doing it a little bit differently, where it's not entirely the old school media style of, we're going to go cover every event. I mean, he's going to do a lot of things remotely, and he's probably going to have guests come in. I just wonder, is guests enough to triumph some of the viewership you're getting here? Guru does do some interviews, but the majority of his content is just, opinion stuff or fight previews and all this different stuff. Are they going to be getting the same numbers as Guru? I don't know. And think about it. They're putting all this money into an entire crew to make this work. I think Ariel's going to be okay, like I said, because his brand name is big enough and people will go to him no matter what. And for the amount of hate he gets, he has just as many people who love his content. I think it's going to be good. But I think the real question is, how is this going to affect MMA fighting, MMA Junkie, some of the staples in MMA media going forward, as I'm sure they're paying attention to these numbers as well. I'll just give you a quick example. MMA fighting did not cover the last UFC card in Vegas. You can see there's a Gilbert Burns interview that they did that's obviously remote. And they were at UFC 305, it looks like, and they got a couple interviews, but you see the volume of their YouTube channel is far less than what they used to, because I think they're realizing, like a lot of people, uploading the same content as everyone else, it's not really the way to go. And then it's partially UFC's fault. Basically, since COVID started, everything's been press conference style. We used to get one-on-ones at Media Day, if you guys remember this, a few years ago before COVID. So at least the content would be unique. Now, we're all uploading. I mean, if you go to an event, that's why I don't go to that many events. You go to the event, you're uploading the exact same content as everyone else. So this press conference, you can find this on other outlets. Now, not every outlet was in Australia covering UFC 305, but, Submission Radio was, MMA Crazy was, I believe MMAJunkie was. So they're essentially uploading the same stuff. Now, some of these numbers are okay, right? You're getting in the 20,000s, but, this Jake Paul presser did quite well, 474,000 views. That's amazing. But if you think of a channel that's got 1 million subscribers and they're getting lower numbers, 4.8K, 11K, 13K for a 305 prediction video, that's not that much in the grand scheme of their subscribers. And you look at Guru, again, the lowest video he's got is 77,000 views. Jesse on Fire, same thing. And granted, Jesse's doing some political stuff here too, which is, helping as well, but same sort of thing. I mean, again, no overhead, huge views on this channel. So that's what I'm kind of curious about. At the time of recording this, today is August 27th. We've not heard a replacement for the MMA Hour. I've had some people messaging me saying that, Jed Meshew says he's hosting the show. Well, I think he was kind of casually joking about that. I don't think a company as big as Vox is just going to, subtly mention they have a new host. And not to mention, Jed doesn't do interviews. So I'm not exactly sure how the show would look if Jed's going to be hosting it. We haven't heard anything at this point in terms of who's going to be hosting the MMA Hour. I do notice, though, like I said on this channel, you're seeing them do less events. Are we going to start to see event coverage dwindle? Now, Junkie's still going strong with that. Here's some stuff from last week's Vegas show. And Ken Hathaway, who does all the, content for them, that's, he lives there, so it's not too big of a deal. But again, look at these numbers here. 738 views, 725 views. And I should mention as well, they're obviously getting money from the website as well, from MMA Fighting, from MMA Junkie. MMA Junkie has the backing of USA Today. But from the YouTube side of things, I mean, for an outlet that has 363,000 subscribers, getting 1,000 views is like the equivalent of like me getting like 20 views on my channel. So that's what I'm kind of interested in. I know they're trying to mix stuff up. I know they're trying to, kind of what I feel like is, while they have been doing YouTube for a while, I think what I've noticed anyways, is I think the typical event coverage, people aren't into it as much unless there's some sort of viral thing. And I think even then, if there's some sort of viral clip, you've got all these content thief accounts and you know which ones I'm talking about. No need to talk about them here, but they're grabbing that big clip anyways. People don't need to watch the full interview. They're just going to see that clip on, social media from an outlet that's already taken it. And Instagram, Twitter, there's so many people that are grabbing those clips from these people that are paying to go and cover the event. And there's costs involved, but they're being outbid now by the other side of it. Maybe that's an entirely different video, is how social media content is basically killing traditional MMA media in that way as well too. So that's what I find really interesting here. So to kind of summarize all this up as we're sort of, going through all this, I'm interested to see how Ariel will do with this new endeavor, because I think it's very risky. I think if this was anyone else that wasn't Ariel Helwani going on a new endeavor, trying to basically make a new outlet, I'd be a little bit worried, because I think content creators are triumphing, or are not triumphing, but they're overtaking, your regular reporters. Like, I think people are more into this than interviews, and a lot of times with interviews, you're relying on how big the guest is, or they have to say something interesting. Guru doesn't even have to worry about that because his content is so good. Again, like, I think Ariel will be fine here. I do wonder though, with MMA Fighting, MMA Junkie, what's that future going to look like? Are they going to continue to go to events? I mean, I'm assuming they will, because you have to go to events, you have to get content. You can only do so much remote content, but things have certainly changed. One other thing I forgot to mention with MMA Fighting, they let go of their managing editor, I want to say 6 months ago, Stephen Morocco. They have no managing editor. So to me, I think they're already seeing some of the writing on the wall. I don't agree with Jesse saying that MMA Fighting necessarily lowballed Ariel, but I do think they're looking at what's going on and they're like, the numbers aren't what they used to be. You know what I mean? Like, even if we look at this channel, let's go back to the MMA Hour, even from like a month ago. Let's look at some of those numbers. 21,000, 36,000, like, they're okay, but are these, these aren't guru numbers, is kind of what I'm getting at. An Aljamain Sterling interview, 36,000 views. That's good for most people, but not for MMA Fighting. It's not. So that's what I wonder, how things are sort of changing with Junkie. They got rid of John Morgan a long time ago. John Morgan obviously leaving to go do stuff with the underground. And now John he's not even doing reporting anymore. My understanding is John's just doing commentary for CFFC and a few other jobs. And they basically took John out of the equation with Ken Hathaway, who is his cameraman. Ken's now doing all this content, so you're saving the cost. So kind of what I'm getting at, you are seeing cost cutting from some of these bigger outlets here. And I think Guru and I think Jesse on Fire is part of the reason for that, because, the YouTube views are getting eaten up for the most part by these guys, because this is what people are more into. And I think that also speaks to a younger audience getting into MMA. I think the older audience, they're not consuming content the way they used to. I don't see people waiting around for interviews and stuff, other than people who are maybe betting on fights. But you look at it there, the content, it's not what it used to be. Things are definitely changing a little bit as well. So my prediction is this, and I'm going to say this at the end of the video here. I think Ariel's going to succeed, but I think it will still be a battle between him and the content creators. I think Junkie and Fighting, I think the way they're going to be doing business is going to be changing going forward, as is some of the other sites as well. It's not what it used to be. Back when there were no major MMA content creators, this was the mecca. You watched these channels because they were getting the top interviews and no one else was. Now everyone's doing remote interviews. Everyone's, grabbing content left, right, and center, and you can't police it because, you can't get that stuff taken down. So I think Fighting and Junkie and some of these other outlets are going to be affected going forward. I think Ariel, it'll be an interesting battle, which I think ultimately the end. And then listen, if it doesn't work out for Ariel, I've said this before, if for some reason the juice is not worth the squeeze what they're paying him, Ariel's going to be fine, because A, he owns the content, and B, he's essentially running his own outlet now. So even if he wants to get out of doing reporting and all this different stuff, he's going to be fine, because at the end of the day, he owns the site and it's just Yahoo partnering with him. And also Ariel's doing stuff, not just MMA wise, he's doing boxing and wrestling. So there's more wiggle room to get better content. There's certainly, we've seen, with the rise of like Misfits and BKFC and some of these other, promotions, that people are consuming different content. So it's not just pigeonholed to MMA, but certainly worth talking about. So I want to know what you guys think in the comment section below. How do you think Ariel will do with this new endeavor with Uncrowned? Do you think MMA Guru and Jesse on Fire and these content creators are going to eventually overtake some of these other outlets? The way they're rising in terms of subscribers and viewer count, it's looking that way, that eventually Guru's going to surpass, Fighting, Junkie, all these other outlets, Mac Life, I forgot to mention them as well. It seems like they're growing faster is kind of what I'm getting at. And I do think the way that people are consuming content has changed certainly a lot. So let me know what you think in the comments. Again, I find this stuff fascinating because I'm just sort of on the sidelines watching things and seeing how things are unfolding. And I certainly notice myself when it comes to content, certain stuff it used to view better before, and now it doesn't, because obviously there's other people involved in the space. So follow me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram. Would love to hear your opinion on this, how you think the industry is changing. My name is James Lynch. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.